There are nights when sleep feels deeper, heavier, more intense than usual. Nights when dreams don't fade quietly into the background. They arrive in waves. Scenes linger. Emotions press harder. You wake up remembering too much, and when you stop to think about it, you notice a pattern. These nights often come after emotional exhaustion, after long days of stress, loss, conflict, overthinking, or quiet burnout. When the body is tired, but the mind is overloaded, it's as if something inside you refuses to rest. Instead of silence, the night fills with stories. Instead of emptiness, the mind becomes vivid, emotional, sometimes overwhelming. You dream more, you remember more, you feel more. And the unsettling part is this: the dreams don't feel random, they feel purposeful, charged, as if the mind is working overtime while you sleep. Why does this happen? Why does emotional exhaustion seem to unlock a deeper, more intense dream world? Why do the nights after stress feel mentally louder than the nights after physical effort? Tonight we're going to explore a paradox at the heart of human consciousness: why the mind becomes most active when it is most depleted. Because dreaming is not the brain shutting down. It is the brain trying to finish something. And when emotions are left unresolved, sleep becomes the place where the mind refuses to let them go. Many people notice the same pattern, even if they've never named it. After periods of emotional exhaustion, burnout, heartbreak, prolonged stress, grief, or deep mental fatigue, dreams become more frequent, more vivid, and more memorable. You wake up recalling entire narratives, emotional tones, faces, and sensations that usually disappear within minutes. This isn't a coincidence, and it isn't imagination. From a scientific and psychological perspective, emotional exhaustion creates the ideal conditions for intensified dreaming, not because the brain is resting more, but because it has more unfinished emotional material to process. When we are emotionally overwhelmed during waking life, the mind often postpones processing. There isn't enough cognitive space to fully feel, reflect, or integrate what's happening. Emotions are suppressed, delayed, compartmentalized. Functioning takes priority over understanding. Sleep changes that priority. During dreaming, especially in REM sleep, the brain shifts away from problem-solving and external demands. Instead, it turns inward. Emotional memory networks become highly active, while the logical, controlling systems of the prefrontal cortex loosen their grip. In this state, the mind is no longer asking, "What do I need to do?" It begins asking, "What do I need to feel?" This is why dreams during emotional exhaustion often feel heavier and more emotionally saturated. They don't necessarily replay real events. Instead, they reconstruct emotional themes: loss, pressure, fear, longing, relief, using symbolic language rather than literal memory. Importantly, dreaming more does not always mean sleeping better. Emotionally exhausted individuals often experience longer REM phases, more frequent awakenings from REM, heightened dream recall, emotionally intense or repetitive dream themes. This creates the impression that dreaming has increased, even if total sleep time has not. From a phenomenological standpoint, these dreams feel different because they carry emotional weight, not because they are more complex. The mind is not entertaining itself, it is attempting resolution. So the phenomenon we're exploring is not simply more dreams. It is the mind using dreams as an emergency processing space when waking life has become emotionally saturated. To understand why this processing intensifies specifically under emotional exhaustion and what psychological mechanisms are responsible, we need to look deeper into how stress, emotion, and memory interact inside the dreaming mind. Psychologically, emotional exhaustion creates a unique internal environment, one where the mind is overloaded, yet unresolved. This is precisely the condition under which dreaming becomes most active. During emotionally demanding periods, the brain prioritizes function over integration. You keep going, you respond, you adapt. But many emotions are never fully processed. They are postponed, muted, or fragmented so that daily life can continue. This strategy works temporarily, but it comes at a cost. That cost is emotional residue. Dreaming emerges as the mind's primary mechanism for dealing with this residue. When conscious control relaxes during sleep, suppressed emotional material resurfaces, not as direct memory, but as symbolic narrative. The dream does not explain emotions, it stages them. One of the key psychological drivers here is emotional load theory. The mind has a limited capacity for emotional regulation during waking life. When that capacity is exceeded, regulation is deferred. Dreams act as a secondary workspace where emotional conflicts can be explored without immediate consequence. This is why emotionally exhausted people often report dreams that are emotionally intense but vague in meaning, repetitive in theme, charged with anxiety, grief, or urgency, focused on unresolved situations rather than past events. Another crucial factor is rumination. Emotional exhaustion is often accompanied by repetitive thinking, looping thoughts that never reach resolution. During sleep, these loops don't stop, they transform. The dreaming mind converts abstract worry into concrete imagery, giving shape to what could not be resolved verbally while awake. Dreams, in this sense, are not random. They are emotional simulations. There is also the role of ego fatigue. In psychology, the ego represents the system responsible for control, inhibition, and self-regulation. Emotional exhaustion weakens this system. When the ego is tired, it becomes less capable of suppressing emotionally charged content. As a result, dreams become less censored. Scenes feel raw. Emotions feel closer to the surface. The dreamer experiences fear, desire, sadness, or relief more directly than usual. This is not because emotions are stronger, but because the filters are weaker. Importantly, this does not mean emotional exhaustion causes pathology. On the contrary, this process is adaptive. Dreams allow the mind to explore emotional material safely, without the demands of action or decision-making. Psychologically speaking, dreaming more during emotional exhaustion is a sign that the mind is still trying to heal, integrate, and make sense of what has been endured. But this psychological process is only possible because of specific changes in brain activity during sleep. To fully understand why emotional exhaustion amplifies dreaming, we now need to examine what happens at the neurobiological level, where emotion and memory converge. At the neurobiological level, emotional exhaustion reshapes the sleeping brain in ways that make intense dreaming not just more likely, but almost inevitable. The key lies in how emotion, memory, and regulation networks behave during REM sleep. When you are emotionally exhausted, the brain's stress systems, particularly those involving the amygdala, hippocampus, and limbic network, remain highly sensitized even during rest. These regions are responsible for emotional tagging, memory consolidation, and threat detection. Instead of quieting down during sleep, they remain active, primed, and reactive. REM sleep amplifies this state. During REM, activity in the amygdala increases significantly, while activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational control, emotional inhibition, and logical sequencing, drops sharply. This creates a perfect storm. Emotions are intensified, while the systems that normally regulate them are offline. In emotionally exhausted individuals, this imbalance becomes even more pronounced. Stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine may remain elevated into the night, fragmenting sleep and increasing the likelihood of REM interruptions. Each interruption makes dreams more memorable. Each re-entry into REM restarts emotional processing, often around the same unresolved themes. This is why emotional exhaustion doesn't just create more dreams, it creates repetitive emotional dreams. The hippocampus also plays a crucial role. Under stress, memory consolidation becomes selective. Instead of integrating experiences smoothly into long-term memory, the brain stores them as emotionally charged fragments. During REM sleep, these fragments are reactivated and recombined, forming dream narratives that feel symbolic, intense, and sometimes chaotic. Neurochemistry reinforces this process. REM sleep is dominated by acetylcholine, which enhances internal imagery and associative thinking. Meanwhile, serotonin and norepinephrine, which help stabilize mood and maintain narrative coherence, are suppressed. The result is a dream state that is emotionally vivid but loosely structured, ideal for emotional processing but not for clarity. Functional imaging studies show that during REM sleep, the brain operates more like an emotional network than a rational one. When emotional exhaustion is present, this network becomes the dominant mode of operation. Importantly, this is not dysfunction. From an evolutionary perspective, REM dreaming may exist precisely to prevent emotional overload from carrying indefinitely into waking life. By reprocessing emotional material during sleep, often repeatedly, the brain reduces its intensity over time. However, when emotional input is excessive or ongoing, the system is pushed harder. The brain dreams more because it has more emotional work to complete. To see how this manifests in real research, experiments, and documented human experience, we now need to step out of theory and into evidence. Posso continuar para a próxima parte? The link between emotional exhaustion and intensified dreaming is not speculative. It appears consistently across sleep research, clinical psychology, and decades of experimental data. One of the most influential frameworks comes from the emotional regulation theory of dreaming, proposed and refined through multiple studies. Researchers observed that individuals exposed to sustained emotional stress, rather than acute trauma, reported increased dream frequency, stronger emotional tone, and higher recall. These dreams were not necessarily nightmares. Instead, they were emotionally saturated, repetitive, and thematically unresolved. A landmark series of studies on REM sleep and emotional memory found that participants exposed to emotionally charged stimuli during the day showed significantly higher limbic activation during REM sleep that night. When awakened during REM, these individuals reported dreams that echoed emotional themes from waking life, but transformed symbolically rather than replayed literally. Another body of evidence comes from burnout and occupational stress research. Medical residents, caregivers, emergency workers, and individuals in prolonged high-responsibility roles consistently report a spike in vivid dreaming during periods of emotional depletion. Sleep lab recordings from these groups show increased REM density, more frequent REM awakenings, higher dream recall rates. Researchers emphasize that this pattern reflects emotional processing load, not sleep quality alone. Grief studies provide some of the clearest documentation. Individuals experiencing prolonged grief often report intense, emotionally complex dreams weeks or months after loss, sometimes long after the most acute emotional pain has subsided during waking life. Researchers interpret this as delayed emotional integration, where the mind continues processing what could not be fully addressed while awake. There are also compelling findings from dream diary studies. When participants track dreams across emotionally neutral weeks versus emotionally exhausting periods, dream content shifts noticeably. Neutral periods produce fragmented or forgettable dreams. Emotionally exhausting periods produce longer narratives, stronger emotions, and recurring motifs. Importantly, participants often report feeling less emotionally burdened after nights of intense dreaming, suggesting a regulatory function. Even neuroimaging studies indirectly support this connection. Functional scans show that people under chronic emotional stress exhibit heightened amygdala reactivity not only during waking hours, but also during sleep-related brain states. The brain does not turn off emotional processing, it postpones it. Across these studies, one conclusion remains consistent. Dreaming more during emotional exhaustion is not a sign of mental instability. It is a sign that the brain is actively trying to restore balance. The mind does not stop working when you are overwhelmed. It simply changes its strategy. Which leads us to the final reflection, one that reframes emotional exhaustion not as failure, but as a signal that the mind is still fighting for integration. When emotional exhaustion makes dreams louder, deeper, and more persistent, it's tempting to see it as another symptom of being overwhelmed. But from a psychological perspective, it may be the opposite. It may be evidence that the mind has not given up. Dreaming more during emotional exhaustion is not the brain malfunctioning. It is the brain refusing to abandon unfinished emotional work. When waking life demands too much, when there is no time, space, or safety to feel fully, sleep becomes the only remaining territory where integration can occur. Dreams take on the burden that consciousness could not carry. They speak in images because words failed. They repeat because resolution has not yet arrived. They feel intense because the emotions were never allowed to be. In this sense, emotional exhaustion does not silence the mind. It activates its deepest repair mechanism. Dreams do not exist to entertain us. They exist to metabolize experience. And when life overwhelms us emotionally, the mind responds the only way it can, by turning inward, by replaying, reshaping, and slowly dissolving what still hurts. So perhaps the question is not, why do I dream more when I'm exhausted? But rather, what is my mind still trying to understand that I haven't had the strength to face while awake? Dreams are not interruptions to rest. They are attempts at healing. And when they arrive in abundance, they are not asking for fear or resistance. They are asking for listening.